The bombs have stopped falling. The missiles are quiet, for now. After the most explosive military confrontation the Middle East has seen in decades, the United States and Iran have pulled back from the edge since then. Ceasefire agreed, negotiations underway. Everyone is breathing a sigh of relief. But here's what the headlines aren't telling you. The real war? It's just getting started. Not a war fought with missiles and warships, but a war over oil, nuclear weapons, global trade routes, and the future power structure of the entire Middle East. And the outcome of this war will affect your gas prices, your economy, and the stability of the entire world, whether you live in New York, London, Lagos, or Lahore. Stay with me, because in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to walk you through exactly what happened, what's really happening right now behind closed doors, and most importantly, what comes next. And I promise you, it's more complicated, more dangerous, and more consequential than anything you're seeing on cable news. Let's start from the beginning.
To understand where we're going, you need to understand how we got here. Because this war didn't start on February 28, 2026, the day the bombs dropped. It started years earlier. Cast your mind back to 2018. President Trump, in his first term, pulls the United States out of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal that Barack Obama spent years negotiating. Trump calls it the worst deal ever made. He slaps Iran with what he calls maximum pressure, the most crushing economic sanctions in history. Iran's currency collapses. Inflation spirals past 40%. Ordinary Iranians can barely afford bread. But here's the thing. Iran doesn't stop its nuclear program. It accelerates it. Fast forward to June 2025. Israel launches what becomes known as the 12-Day War, a stunning air campaign that cripples Iran's air defenses and strikes its nuclear infrastructure. The United States joins in, dropping massive GBU-57 bunker buster bombs on underground nuclear sites at Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. Trump calls it a one-off mission. The world exhales. But then a leaked U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency report quietly drops a bombshell. Iran had moved much of its enriched uranium stockpile before the strikes. The underground facilities weren't fully destroyed. Iran's nuclear setback? Months, not years. Meanwhile, the economic pressure keeps building. In September 2025, the UN reimposes sanctions on Iran using a snapback mechanism. Iran's currency enters freefall. And then on December 28, 2025, protests erupt across Iran, the biggest since 1979.
Trump publicly encourages the protesters. He warns the Iranian government not to crack down. They crack down anyway. In January 2026, Iranian security forces massacred at least 30,000 civilians, according to Iran's own Ministry of Health. 30,000 people. And that, combined with intelligence provided by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, pushed Trump over the edge. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury. The strikes were designed to kill Iran's leadership, destroy its military, and spark regime change. Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, killed. Multiple Iranian officials, assassinated. Tehran rocked by explosions. But Iran didn't collapse. It fought back. Iran's military couldn't match American firepower. Everyone knew that. So Iran reached for a different weapon, one that could hurt the entire world. The Strait of Hormuz. This narrow strip of water, just 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, is the jugular vein of the global economy. 20% of the world's oil passes through it every single day. Not just oil, Also, liquefied natural gas, fertilizers, petrochemicals. If you drive a car, heat your home, buy food, you depend on this strait. Iran closed it. Overnight, the International Energy Agency called it the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Brent crude, which was trading around $70 before the war, surged to over $111 per barrel within weeks. U.S. gas prices jumped 50%. In Europe, the head of the IEA warned there were maybe 6 weeks of jet fuel left.
Airline tickets skyrocketed. Fertilizer supplies collapsed. Food prices in countries like Nigeria, India, and Mexico began rising sharply. In Mexico City, tortilla shops are barely breaking even. In Lagos, people stopped driving their cars. Countries as far away as Sri Lanka were rationing fuel at the pump. Meanwhile, Iran's proxies across the region joined the fight. Hezbollah in Lebanon escalated. Houthi rebels in Yemen launched missiles toward Israel and threatened to shut down the Bab el-Mandeb Strait too, the Red Sea's main shipping choke point. Over 600 attacks were recorded against U.S. facilities in Iraq alone during the active conflict. A drone even struck Britain's Akrotiri military base in Cyprus. Missiles were shot down over Turkey. The conflict threatened to pull in the entire region and beyond. The United States launched Project Freedom on May 4th, a massive naval operation using destroyers, helicopters, fighter jets, and drones to escort merchant ships through the Strait of Hormuz. In 2 days, they got 2 ships through. 2 out of hundreds stuck in the Persian Gulf. Iran sank 6 small boats that attacked those ships. Iranian cruise missiles targeting U.S. destroyers were shot down. And Trump, just 1 day into Project Freedom, paused the operation, citing diplomatic progress. Iran's state media declared it. Trump backs down. So where does that leave us? Right now, as of this moment, the U.S. and Iran are technically in a ceasefire. The bombing stopped roughly a month ago. 1 round of talks has happened, and Pakistan, yes, Pakistan, has emerged as the key mediator, hosting negotiations in Islamabad. But if you think a deal is close, I want you to listen very carefully. Here are the core demands on the table, and here's why they are almost impossible to reconcile. The United States wants Iran to stop all uranium enrichment, permanently, 0 enrichment, hand over or remove its entire stockpile of highly enriched uranium, over 400 kilograms of material that the U.S. says could be used to build a bomb, end its ballistic missile program, stop funding and arming Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and every other proxy group across the Middle East. Iran's response? A flat no, at least on enrichment. Iran says it has the right to enrich uranium. It says its program is peaceful, and it says the nuclear issue is too complicated to solve right now. Let's end the war first, reopen the strait, lift the blockade, and then we'll talk about nuclear issues later. Iran actually sent a 14-point peace proposal to Washington suggesting exactly that. End the war, reopen Hormuz, lift sanctions, and push nuclear talks to a separate, later phase. Trump's reaction on Saturday? I can't imagine it would be acceptable. They haven't paid a big enough price yet. And here's the trap inside this stalemate. If Trump accepts Iran's proposal and lifts the blockade before getting nuclear concessions, he loses his main leverage. The Strait of Hormuz is the only thing forcing Iran to the table. The moment it reopens, Iran's pressure to make a deal evaporates. But if Trump keeps the blockade going and demands Iran surrender its nuclear program before any deal, Iran has every incentive to drag negotiations out, because they're using Hormuz to bleed the global economy, hoping economic pain at home will force Trump into a corner before the November midterm elections. It is, as they say, a Mexican standoff. And inside Iran, there's even more dysfunction. Sources close to the negotiations told Axios that Iran's own leadership is deeply divided. There's no consensus inside Tehran on how much to concede on nuclear issues. The hardliners want to hold firm. Others want a way out.
Pakistan, Oman, Egypt, Turkey, Qatar, all of them are working overtime as go-betweens. Iran's foreign minister, Arakchi, flew from Islamabad to Muscat to St. Petersburg, meeting Putin in a single 72-hour sprint. Russia praised Iran's courage. China is watching closely, with Trump meeting President Xi Jinping on May 14th and saying Beijing could help a lot more on Iran. The ceasefire is holding, just barely. There are already shots being fired in the Strait of Hormuz. Schools in the UAE are back to remote learning. The fragile truce is under daily pressure. So, what comes next? What are the realistic scenarios? Let me give you 3 scenarios, and be honest with yourself about which one you think is most likely. Scenario 1, a limited deal, the half win. In this scenario, Trump and Iran reach a narrow agreement in the next few weeks. The Strait of Hormuz reopens, the blockade is lifted, Iran agrees to some limits on enrichment, maybe a 20-year suspension, as the US is reportedly proposing, though Iran has countered with just 5 years. The nuclear question is kicked down the road. Iran's proxies? Still armed. Hezbollah? Still in Lebanon. The underlying tensions? Unresolved. This is the most likely short-term outcome, and it's what Iran is pushing for. It ends the immediate pain, gives Trump a win he can sell before the midterms, and buys Iran time to quietly rebuild its capabilities underground. Carnegie Endowment researchers put it this way: Tehran may conclude that its ability to disrupt the global economy through Hormuz now provides enough deterrence to begin quietly rebuilding its nuclear program underground, even without large industrial-scale enrichment facilities. In other words, Iran plays the long game, again. In this scenario, negotiations collapse. Iran refuses to make nuclear concessions. Trump, facing a restless Republican base and rising gas prices at home, decides to resume strikes before the midterms. The targets this time would be Iran's energy infrastructure, its oil refineries, its bridges, its economic lifelines. Trump already threatened exactly this back in March, setting multiple deadlines he ultimately pulled back from. If strikes resume, Iran would likely follow through on threats to fully shut down Bab el-Mandeb in the Red Sea, working through Houthi proxies in Yemen. That would effectively close 2 of the world's most critical shipping choke points simultaneously. Oil could hit $150 a barrel. Economists at Qatar's energy ministry have already warned this figure could trigger what they called a collapse of world economies. Markets are already, in the words of one analyst at CNBC, sleepwalking into a recession. The S&P 500 hit an all-time high on May 1st, even as oil prices had surged more than 50% since the war began. Analysts at Energy Aspects called it extremely misplaced euphoria. If war resumes, that euphoria ends very quickly. Scenario 3, a comprehensive deal, the long shot. In this scenario, Trump's upcoming meeting with Xi Jinping on May 14th changes the equation. China, which is deeply invested in Iranian oil and the broader Middle East, uses its leverage to push Iran toward a real deal. In exchange, the US offers sanctions relief and some kind of security guarantee. Iran agrees to zero enrichment for a defined period. Its uranium stockpile is transferred to a third country, like Russia, and a new monitoring framework is created. This would be a geopolitical earthquake. It would give Trump a legacy-defining foreign policy win. It would be the deal that eluded every president before him. But here's the problem. The Trump administration cannot credibly offer Iran meaningful sanctions relief because of domestic political constraints and long-standing congressional opposition. And Iran knows this, which makes Iran less willing to show flexibility on enrichment. As the Carnegie Endowment's experts put it, the gap between the two sides on the nuclear question may simply be too wide to bridge. The comprehensive deal is possible, but it is the least likely of the 3 scenarios. Now, let's talk about you, because no matter where you're watching this from, this war has already reached your doorstep. If you're in the United States, Your gas prices have risen 50% since February 28th. Inflation is heading above 3%. The Federal Reserve is caught between fighting inflation and not crashing the economy with rate hikes. If you're in Europe, you're facing an inflation spike above 4%, and you may be facing interest rate hikes from the European Central Bank at the worst possible time. Europe has already been cut off from Russian gas. Now, Gulf LNG is disrupted too. The head of the IEA warned the continent has around 6 weeks of jet fuel reserves. If you're in Asia, India, Pakistan, South Korea, Japan, you are among the most vulnerable. These economies are heavily import-dependent for energy, and there is no short-term substitute for Gulf oil. If you're in the global south, in Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, you are getting hit twice. First, by rising energy prices. Second, by rising food prices. Because fertilizer, which depends on natural gas, is becoming scarce and expensive. In Mexico, food sellers can't maintain price caps much longer. In Nigeria, people are choosing between driving to work and buying groceries.
The World Economic Forum put it bluntly. What begins as a battlefield shock hardens into a geoeconomic one. And here's the geopolitical dimension that almost nobody is talking about. This war has fundamentally changed the power map of the Middle East. Iran's supreme leader is dead. A new leadership, led by Khamenei's son, is untested and under enormous pressure. The Iranian regime's axis of resistance, its network of proxy forces across Lebanon, Gaza, Iraq, Yemen, Syria, has been severely weakened, but not eliminated. Hezbollah is still fighting in Lebanon. The Houthis just launched new missiles toward Israel. Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states are watching nervously. They privately wanted Iran weakened, but not so destabilized that the region descends into permanent chaos. A collapsed Iran is almost as dangerous as a nuclear Iran. And China is quietly positioning itself as the indispensable peace broker, gaining strategic influence across the Middle East at the exact moment the United States is consumed by its own war fatigue and economic pressure.
The missiles stopped, but the war didn't end. It just moved into a different phase, a phase of diplomatic chess, economic warfare, nuclear brinkmanship, and a global power struggle for the future of the Middle East. The ceasefire is fragile. The negotiations are at an impasse. Iran's nuclear question remains completely unresolved. And the Strait of Hormuz, that narrow 33-kilometer choke point, is still the most dangerous piece of water on planet Earth. The world is watching 3 deadlines converge right now: the U.S. war powers clock, Trump's China summit on May 14th, and the economic pressure building inside both Washington and Tehran. Something is going to give. The question is, what? A limited deal that kicks the nuclear can down the road? A breakdown that triggers a new round of devastating strikes? Or an unlikely comprehensive deal that reshapes the Middle East for a generation? The answer will determine whether your gas prices come down or keep rising, whether the global economy tips into recession, whether the next generation inherits a more stable Middle East or a more dangerous one. This story is far from over, and I'll be covering every development right here as it unfolds. If you found this breakdown valuable, share it with someone who needs to understand what's really going on. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Which scenario do you think plays out? And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next update. Because trust me, the next few weeks are going to be critical. I'll see you in the next one.